let's hit one of the more important updates that CMS posted in their final proposed rule here about risk audits using what's called CMS's version 28. So essentially, this week, CMS pressed paused on pushing the diagnosis codes in these risk audits for AEP 2027. They rolled out what's called version 28 back in 2024. And it's essentially a risk adjustment model used by CMS to determine how much Medicare Advantage plans get paid by diagnosis for a member, right? So, in simple terms, CMS pays Medicare Advantage plans more money for sicker members and less money for healthier members. To do this, CMS uses what's called a hierarchical conditions category model, also known as an HCC risk adjustment. So every few years, CMS updates this model, and each model update is called a different version. That's why you get version 21, 22, 24, and now we're on version 28. Each of these versions changes which conditions count for extra incentive pay to a Medicare Advantage carrier, how much they count, and how they group these diagnoses. Think Part A DRG, right? Diagnosis related group, kinda. And ultimately, this decides how much carriers get paid. Now, before this new model, version 28, there were earlier versions that shaped the Medicare Advantage market. It's how we see it today. For instance, version 21 was used for many years. It was generally considered way more generous for Medicare Advantage carriers than what proponents argued they needed. So we're talking about coding opportunities that give ultimately much higher risk scores per diagnosis. And this shaped a lot of Medicare Advantage's growth over the past decade. Then CMS introduced what's known as version 24, and this tightened things, but only slightly. So some of the diagnoses that were on version 21 were removed. Some of the weights, how they weighted the categories, were reduced, and there was more emphasis on predictive accuracy. But overall, even version 24 was still considered relatively favorable for Medicare Advantage and really didn't dramatically disrupt the market. Then came version 28. And this was a really big shift. So CMS introduced version 28 in 2023 and phased it in gradually. So in 2024, the plans used 33% of version 28. In 2025, it was another two-thirds, so 66 and two-thirds or 67%. And finally, AEP 26, version 28 was fully implemented. Now, version 28 made a lot of structural changes. So CMS removed thousands of diagnosis codes. They've reduced the weight on many of the chronic conditions and eliminated some overlapping diagnosis codes and reduced opportunities for coding intensity. So the stated goal was to improve payment accuracy, right? They wanted to reduce this upcoding issue and to better reflect the actual healthcare costs that Medicare Advantage are paying for. And the result was very predictable. Version 28 effectively reduced the risk scores across the board. It's reduced payments to MA carriers, and it's tightened those MA margins where they used to be a lot more lax to receive money based on diagnosis. Now, a lot of analysts are expecting benefits cuts from this. I mean, you can imagine more conservative plan designs and slower growth. And it's largely what we've seen so far with tightened benefits, commission reductions, and plans just exiting the market. So, of course, you're going to see more cautious benefit structure. The market began adjusting to the tighter Medicare Advantage environment back when version 28 was announced and released in 2024. And that brings us to this week. CMS was expecting to push even further tightening restraints for AEP 2027. However, because of lobbyists, instead, CMS has increased the payments. They've paused that additional tightening, and they've allowed this version 28 to settle in. Now, they've paused it indefinitely, not forever. One of the heads of CMS said they will come back to this. They're not abandoning this reform. And it doesn't mean the MA it's collapsing, obviously not. They're actually reversing some of what they were going to do with version 28. But what it suggests is that CMS is realizing, hey, stacking too many changes too quickly could destabilize the MA market, and we're already seeing it right now. So instead of a sudden disruption, they want to see more of a gradual tightening for Medicare Advantage carriers. So CMS implemented one of essentially the biggest structural changes to Medicare Advantage in years, right? The market's tightening, and now the market is adjusting. So CMS has pressed pause on further introduction on version 28. Now, this doesn't stop the reform, but It's going to let Medicare Advantage carriers at least exhale a little further than they currently are able to this year. Now, based on history, we should expect additional tightening coming into the future. It's just not going to happen all at once, which, this is some of the better news we've heard for Medicare Advantage in at least a few years.